Hi folks, in this video we're going to be looking at painting the white armour on this Ultramarines veteran in the same style as used on the box art by the heavy metal team. So without any further ado, let's cue the music. To start out with, I'll be applying a base coat to the areas that I want to be white with a mixture of, it's roughly 2 to 1, 3 to 1, with the high concentration being a pure white, in this case Vallejo model white, and the smaller consistency being of Ulthuan Grey from Games Workshop. And I've thinned this down quite heavily with water, and I'll be looking to cover this in probably 3 to 4 thin coats. White paint has a tendency to go chalky, so with this it's much more about taking your time, getting lots of thin layers layered up, not worrying about getting a complete opaque coat in 2 coats. And we are using the Ulthuan Grey to give us an extra bit of opacity into our pure white paint, and we want to go with something that's not quite white as our main overall paint, but still reads very white, as it gives us a place to go up to with a highlight. If we started out with pure white, then we wouldn't have anywhere to go to highlight to, and we'd be painting in all of our shadow tones. So adding a little bit of a very light grey, such as Ulthuan Grey from Games Workshop, as well as increases that opacity ever so slightly, makes this paint an off-white, which allows us to do a white highlight later. So with your favourite base coating brush, go around all the areas that you want to be white on this model, looking to cover in several thin passes. So on this Starngard veteran, we are going to be doing his helmet and the trim on his shoulder pauldrons. Next step on painting this white armour is to put a soft shadow into the recesses, and to do this I have heavily thinned down some light grey from Vallejo model colour, but a close approximation would be Administratum Grey from Games Workshop. And the idea with this is I've thinned this down to a very thin consistency. It's not quite a glaze or a wash, it's got a little bit more body to it than that. It's still very thin to allow us to almost wash this into recesses. It's thicker than that as we want to give ourselves a lot more control. And as you can see, this is going on very wet, and I'm using a thin brush with a nice tip to make sure that we can push this paint and this pigment right into the recesses. What we now need to do, once we've pushed it there, is to clean off the brush and to wick away any excesses, because what we want to try and avoid with this is any coffee staining of effect onto the miniature. And what I've done here is I've taken our original base coat colour and I've neatened up some little coffee staining that had started to be appearing there. But the nice thing about Space Marines is they have lots of ridges, lots of recesses, and this soft shade technique really does allow us to emphasize all those details without trying to have to worry about doing particularly neat edge highlights. So what you want to do is use the wet paint, use the thin paint to do a lot of the work for you, knowing that you can neaten up with your original base coat, and with it being very thin, you can do multiple passes of this to get an opacity that you'd like. When it comes to doing shoulder trim, look to try and put this colour down towards areas that will be shadowed on the model. That top edge where the sun is going to hit, we're going to try and avoid that, but this area underneath his armour, we're going to put a single pass on there underneath the shoulder where it's going to have the gun going into, and generally into the shadowed areas where there's going to be some blocking or where the white meets the blue. We can use this to neaten out and soften out any mistakes we've made. But generally on the big flat surfaces we're tending to avoid this, and we're looking to use this to define shape and texture changes, such as the crest on his helmet, his eye sockets, the slits in the nose, the area over the ear, for example. Our last step is to come in with a pure white to do a final highlight onto the white areas of the model. For this I'm using matte white from Vallejo model color, but you can use whatever your favorite white happens to be. I quite happen to like this one. And so with this color we're going to be looking at layering it onto the areas where the light is going to hit the most. So starting out with this shoulder pad here, I'm going to be focusing on the top of that curve where the light is going to be the strongest, and I'm going to move the pigment so that it's going to be thickest on my brush towards the strongest light source. So when you do a stroke on your brush, when you pick the brush up off the model, that is where the most pigment is left behind once you've thinned your paint down. So when we're doing this, we want to do this at a point where we're going to be using that to emphasize that this is where our final highlight is going to be. Now, the nice thing about starting with a very light mixed base coat to begin with is this is actually quite subtle. This paint is already reading quite light and quite white to begin with. So when it comes to doing this final highlight, we're thinning this down just a little bit more than normal with water, looking to pick out with the side of the brush any of the sharpest edges, and to pick out raised areas on flat panels where the light is going to hit the strongest. So on the forehead here, his head's tilted to one side, to the side of the helmet, the sides of the ridges, and I'm going to be painting most of the top of that ridge part on his helmet. And as you can see, this is really thin, so this is semi-transparent going on here, so this isn't drastically altering the color going on, so we can be quite rough and loose with this. And if you think that you go too far, you can always come back in with your previous color to soften out any transitions. And it's just a matter of going around until you get the brightness that you desire, getting that nice soft subtle transition into a pure white. Making sure that you use a nice thin tip brush and practice bracing your hand to get those sharpest edges that are a little bit more tricky, like the bridge of the nose, under the eyes, and those angled vent slats on the nose of the helmet. And with that, the white armour on this ultramarine Stern Guard veteran is now complete. If you've liked this tutorial, why not consider subscribing? It's free of charge, it helps me out, and you get further videos just like this one in your YouTube feed. So, until next time folks.